Can a game make you feel things? Anyone who's cried during a cutscene, murdered a sibling over Catan, or watched the finale of Critical Role could confidently answer yes. Games, subjective as they are, can evoke all kinds of emotions. That's self-evident and not quite what I'm talking about. So instead, let's ask, can a game system make you feel things? Something specific, like, say, dread? Dread is inevitability, uncertainty. It's covering my mouth in stunned silence at this scene from Hereditary, or putting my book down while reading Phantom of the Opera. Raoul had cursed the Phantom thrice over before seeing two burning eyes at the foot of his bed.
They stared at him fixedly, terribly in the darkness of the night.
I was laying in my bed when I first read this, in my first rental since moving out. I was working 2 jobs, so my reading time was long after dark. Engrossed in this dusty old public domain book app on my phone, gripped by fear, I had to stop reading as Raoul, trembling, reached for the matches. I was scared of what might happen. I stopped reading for, probably not very long, which prolonged the feeling longer than if I'd simply kept reading. 2 short sentences later, it was revealed to be nothing, but in that liminal space, I felt it. Dread. Can a game that is a game system do that? Splatoon 2 is a 2017 third-person shooter game developed and published by Nintendo for the Nintendo Switch. With customized outfits and ink-based weapons, Inklings and Octolings team up to fight in thrilling online multiplayer battles or go at it alone in single-player story mode.
I personally like the single-player more, but I think I'm kind of the minority on that.
This is Al, an avid fan of the game. Having beaten both story modes and with over 600 hours clocked on and offline, they started to see the game as an avenue for storytelling.
Splatoon was actually probably, aside from, childhood OCs, I think, Splatoon was probably, the first property that I felt comfortable making OCs for. I think it's just so OC-friendly.
An OC is an original character placed within a fictional world, usually for RP, or roleplay, a storytelling phenomenon that's sweeping the globe. Most roleplay enthusiasts our viewers might be familiar with use large rule books, a variety of dice, and a kind of referee called a game master. But for expert role players such as Al, most of that has become unnecessary. I sat down with them today to learn about their so-called roleplay tournaments. Twice a year or so, this tight-knit group of role players gathers for 2 to 3 days in a row to play out a series of squid battles for hours each night.
It's definitely like stadium, you're being spectated at every move. It's really high energy.
So tell me about these tournaments. What does the order of events usually look like?
Usually order events, first off, the announcer Kaki will announce the teams, announce the prize. We'll get the players to roll dice. We'll add up their dice rolls, and whoever has the highest score wins that match. And based on personal performance, if a character rolls a 1, then that RPer can tell Camo what happened. Oh shit, my character fell off the map and got a concussion or something. And then the actual RP that the players get to do is post-match interaction in the lobby.
With quality roleplay being so important, we talked for a minute about what kind of characterization is important to bring to the game.
So I just think don't take it too seriously. Have a character, if they're a loner, at least have them be open to talking to people, because otherwise they're going to get left out of events and interactions and stuff. Okay, so those sound guidelines for creating a character, but when we're talking about the more superficial elements like picking an outfit and picking a weapon, do those play into characterization? Oh, yeah, definitely. The sniper weapons are usually for more serious, kind of introverted characters. The big heavy dynamo rollers are usually for the tough guys. There's definitely personality traits attributed to the weapons. And then the clothes, the fashion in Splatoon is so extensive that you can dress them basically just like a normal person. There's goth clothes, there's punk, there's preppy. Do you think this is an experience that just anyone could have if they wanted to? I feel like anybody who has a pretty tight RP group could do this. I don't know how to give advice to people who want to have a really tight RP crew. I think you just have to cultivate the correct environment that you want to be in.
Al's been telling stories with their group for over 4 years. With a mixture of skill, trust, and experience, they can jump in to play handmade characters such as Earl, Yarrow, or Vero and have a role. So, what we're looking at here is closer to free-form roleplay than your average tabletop game. But since we're asking if a system can make you feel things, where's the system here? There must be more to it than the battle roll, despite it being the clearest example of system. It's basically just divination for the only question the players can't answer themselves. It's not what gives the game its specificity. So, what are the core components? There's character creation, give your character a look and a weapon and a name, a strong shared premise to play Inklings and Octolings in Splatoon's world, player skill, composing a personality, a history, and maybe relationships with existing characters, and of course the resolution mechanic, which, with another helping of player skill, acts as a jumping-off point for more roleplay. Through that lens, this system has contemporaries in micro-RPGs, one-page RPGs, and business card RPGs, yet can make some of them look complex by comparison. Let's take Tunnel Goons, for example, a pay-what-you-want analog adventure game for nice people by writer, illustrator, and patron of mine, Nate Treme. Its premise, in lieu of an international video game IP, includes a Robomantis in the example of play. It has the abilities Brute, Skulker, and Erudite, evoking the classic wizard-thief fighter, and its equipment and character tables. When a roll on one of those tables says you joined the militia or the rebels and then gives you a shield or a bear trap, it's like choosing your weapon in Splatoon. It's a tool at your disposal, yes, but it says something about your character's history and personality. It's also world building. There are garden acolytes, whatever those are, and with some clever number matching, it describes botany priests. So, as a kid, you might have been a book fetch working for a library guide, or a gear lark working under a pit warden? Uh-oh. Well, I know what our first adventure is going to be. For another example, we can look at Honey Heist, the quote-unquote surprisingly successful one-page RPG by Grant Howitt. It's got a premise, your criminal bears. It's got customization, roll a hat. It's got a D6 resolution mechanic. And it has 2 new things, GM advice and adventure generation for the eponymous Honey Heist. It's not much, this is a one-page RPG. The advice is basically keep one surprise in mind for your players and make failure complicated, which is good advice, but the adventure generation is what I really want to focus on. With 5 tables, you get a location, goal, obstacle, NPC, and a twist. Each one is doing something different and equally valuable, only truly shining, as all roll tables do, once they're randomly combined and the GM gets to sort through the bizarre results. The notable difference between these systems is that Honey Heist seems to be experientially focused. Your special skill and 2 stats, Bear and Criminal, can be applied creatively, but are built around the specific situation of Bear Heist that the system and its adventure tools are built for. Similarly, but distinctly different, the pieces of Tunnel Goons, its abilities and inventory system, apply broadly to just whatever you want to do. It's built so adventure can come from an external source, whether also purchased from Highland Paranormal Society or elsewhere, or just made up by the GM. This is more interesting than a Webster's Dictionary definition of game, isn't it? But you might be wondering, where does the spookiness come in? Where does the dread come in? Well, for those of you that really just want to get to the review without the context, which will not be a good time, this timestamp is brought to you by Sean Richer and Patreon Yeater, my highest tier and longest standing patrons, respectively, as well as all of these cool folks. They made this video possible, so if you really just want the review, then you can thank them, not me, because I'm putting you through hell. But for those of you that are not skipping ahead, we still have to nail down this definition. So, we were talking about Honey Heist and Tunnel Goons. Both of these games have like a few more parts floating around than the super light Splatoon RP game, right? But I got a question. In games with more than one rule, what constitutes interacting with the whole game? Some parts look pretty crucial to the experience, other bits look pretty extraneous. I'm going to answer that question with a scarecrow. A popular scarecrow, that's straw man but gender neutral, in the greater RPG discourse, involves a player or group of players, usually playing Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, who proclaim they played D&D and no one even touched the dice. This is presented as if the player thinks it's a good thing, a remarkably entertaining, successful session of D&D. The rebuttal to this phenomenon, though, claims If you don't engage with the system during play, then the system isn't supporting your fun, and you'd be better off using a system that you did engage with. Which is to say you should be playing Dungeon World. Furthermore, a canceled person, and with that context clue you can probably guess who, extrapolated this claim to say that the group that didn't touch the dice was not even playing Dungeons and Dragons at that point. Now, in a game like Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, it's hard not to roll dice. It can happen, but it's a complex enough game that at any point you could call for a roll to punctuate the imaginative play, or to give yourself a number to improvise off of, or to actually adjudicate the consequence of an action like you're supposed to. So it's not only notable, but it seems contrary to the, one might say, system for a variety of reasons. This gets at the heart of one definition of system, which is that a system is a set of rules that exist to answer the questions of play. So if Splatoon RP's one die roll is meant to answer who wins, then the mechanics in 5th edition are supposed to answer all sorts of questions. How persuasive am I? Does anyone notice? How much damage does my attack do? When one of these questions and many, many more get asked, you kind of pause the game for a split second, the system interjects, and you get an answer. That last example question, though, damage, is kind of a sticking point in the no-roll session. Because, logically, you either fought something, but didn't use the dozens upon dozens of rules that are meant to answer what happens when you fight things, or you didn't fight anything. You just talked. In a game that has very little rules for answering what happens when you talk. So, even if our hypothetical group was role-playing as characters that they made in 5e, even if they were role-playing in the Forgotten Realms, they're not really playing 5e because they never ask the system any of the questions they're supposed to. Put simply, under this definition, a system is its resolution mechanics. Hello, it's Vi from the future. I somehow forgot a transition paragraph, so here we are. We're establishing these definitions not only because they'll be important later, but because when you're playing a game, you bring these definitions with you to the table. Parts of this video are me inspecting the conversations that have involved me and gone on around me in the tabletop scene because they've shaped the way that I interpret and play games. To demonstrate this, I have brought you to my bookshelf, where I'm going to tell you about a time when such a shift happened in my brain, when I was running Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. You're so strong.
Yeah.
For the record, Arlo, strong. My D&D home game has gone through a lot of phases. I started out, like many others, running the Lost Mines of Phandelver for anyone who would play. This is a really creative time for me. I made custom spell cards for every spell that my players' characters learned. And I gave each one a custom, magic phrase with a different magical etymology for each class. So there was Sindarin, Latin, Aurelian, and I spent effort making sure that the magic words were actually kind of translatable to be applicable to the spell. It was crazy. I made 5th edition reference sheets and advice sheets that I handed out to my players. I transcribed almost all of Phandelver. Eventually, I moved on to homebrew adventures, telling thrilling stories in shared worlds. And then, at some point, something changed. D&D is only good for combat, I read somewhere. D&D is a game about combat, someone said somewhere. Having read a lot more tabletop RPGs by this point, and maybe with a growing resentment for 5th edition, I started to view my home game through this lens. And it got worse. They basically became like a string of big game hunts. Combat was balanced, the setting was flat, my NPCs were signposts for the next encounter, and my players could feel the difference. Isn't this truer to 5e? I should think so. My stories had to be about combat because the system is telling a story about combat, and where did I go from telling my own stories to telling the system's story? I lost something along the way, and I can't wholly blame the discourse, or 5e, or myself, but my games were better when I had less regard for the system. So, what's it there for, if it's just going to make my games worse? Maybe I should have less of it. My system.
Fight?
Ow!
Fight?
Ow! 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 How do you do it? What am I missing? It's one roll. Should I just have one roll and get rid of everything else? If so, why do I own all these systems? You seem to be having fun, but you're working with so little. Well, I say little, but that kind of dismisses the informal skills you've developed as ephemeral and the meat of the game as being what little procedure you have, but is procedure not what we mean when we say system? 'Tis thy name that is my enemy. Thou art thyself, though not system. What system? It is nor illustration, nor layout, nor story, nor reader, nor any other part belonging to a book. What's in a game? That which we call play, by any other resolution system would run just as smooth. So Splatoon roleplay, were it not resolved with the D20, would still Splatoon roleplay be. Retain that simple perfection its players love, no matter its die roll. So then doff that title system, which is no part thyself, and be only play.
Boo!
Adira?
Suck a bag of dicks.
What are you doing here?
I saw the Twitter drama.
I haven't mentioned the Twitter drama yet. I'm deliberately broaching the subject from the side.
Hot.
What? Wait. You've been listening, so systems are just nonsense that comes in with its own agenda, its own story to tell. I don't have to worry about all that. I just want to play. Isn't that the truest form of play?
So, I think, go have fun with that. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with it.
There's not?
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. You can do that. Is it the purest form of a game? No. I would argue that the concept, the purest form of a tabletop game is bullshit. Yeah. And, like, there's nothing wrong with wanting rules.
Well, like, what about the times I want to ignore the rules or make up my own rules, but it feels like if I do that, then I'm somehow no longer playing the game correctly.
Why?
Because I don't want its experience. I want my own.
It shouldn't be there then. You should play a different game. Or just change it to the experience that you want. Let's say you're going to take Dungeons and Dragons and use it to do something else with D&D, right? The reasons when those sorts of things become suboptimal is when the people who use D&D to do something else are cowards about it. If you're going to take D&D to do something else, and you're going to just play a politics game, or a romance or courtly intrigue or whatnot, you should be just entirely excising a big chunk of mechanics, right? If those people just like went and did a little bit of design, they would have a much better time. And if they go, well, I also homebrew D&D, you go, oh, that's a different game now. Congratulations. You made your own game. I'm very proud of you.
Wait, so it's a different game then because you changed the rules. That means the system is the rules, right?
When I think about game systems, I don't think about just the text of the book itself. Sitting down to like play D&D is a holistic activity, right?
Okay.
Like the whole like world's greatest role-playing game marketing shit is part of the system of D&D.
Whoa, that's a way broader definition than what I was using. Through that lens, what other parts of a game are its system?
The art, the layout, every single word, the weight of the book, the size of the book, where you bought the book, how you store the book, how you interact with it. Is it a bunch of sheets that you printed off at a Kinko's because the game technically doesn't have any publishing rights, so it's legal effectively to bind your own copies of this because the publisher went under, and so we can just make our own versions of Noblest Second Edition because it's not in print, like my friends and I did in college.
Okay, go on.
Reading a game on your phone versus reading it at a laptop. Not reading the game at all and just going off of the culture of play.
Wait, you can run a game without having read it before?
Yeah. I've never read D&D 5th edition. I've read and played every single other edition of D&D. I taught myself chainmail when I was like 15 because I'm a completionist. And a local game store to me, when 5th edition first came out, it's like, hey, you're a buddy. You know how games work. Can you come run some games to teach people how to play 5th edition and like help us get like weekly games started? The game store like it just opened. I was like, oh yeah, sure. I showed up. They'd all made characters already. So I was just like, all right. I just started running something, whatever. Don't even remember. I ran 3 sessions of it. And then I looked at the bard and I said, you're the DM now. And I left. And I ran D&D 5th edition.
Even having not read the rules, that game was 5th edition. Then.
Yeah.
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 Okay, I've got a question for you then. You're a game designer. Do you think a system can make you feel things just by itself?
I have a number of games that are lyric games where the primary form of play is just reading it, and you have to be open to feeling things when you read stuff. Otherwise, you're not playing the game. You're just reading a bunch of words. But just because lyric games posit that reading is the primary form of playing doesn't mean they're necessarily unplayable. I love hearing when people play my lyric games. It's fabulous. And in that sense, I mean physically play it, not read play. So one of my lyric games that I haven't talked about that much is a lyric game that I wrote called Feedback.
Step A. Make 27 copies of Survey A1. See below. A digital file is available online. One side of the page should be blank. Do not print double-sided. Step B. Gather a pen or pencil, maybe a few. Step C. Start a 30-minute timer. Step D. Using the blank side of Survey A1, see below, draw a chair. It doesn't have to be a real chair. It could be a fake chair. It could be a space chair. It could be a bad chair. Step E. Once the timer is up, immediately stop drawing. Step F. After the timer goes off, start a 15-minute timer. Step G. Before you begin drawing again, but after the timer has begun, take Survey A1. See below. Step H. Using the blank side of another Survey A1, see below, draw a chair. It doesn't have to be a real chair. It could be a fake chair. It could be a space chair. It could be a bad chair. Step I. Once the timer is up, immediately stop drawing. Take Survey A1, see below. Then go back to Step F if this is your first time at Step I. Step J. After the second timer goes off, a 10-minute timer. Step K. Before you begin drawing again, but after the timer has begun, take Survey A1, see below. Step L. Using the blank side of another Survey A1, see below, draw a chair. It doesn't have to be a real chair. Draw a chair. If this is your third time reading this rule, it could be a bad chair. If this is your sixth time reading this rule, if this is your 15th time reading this rule, take survey A1, see below. Then, take survey A2, see below. Survey A2 has a place for you to write your final name and your final time. It says final because each survey A1 has a line for current name and current time. I took that survey about as many times as I drew chairs, but the chairs were the more important part to me. But it says 0, get a glass of water, drink it, and you can see I got my water bottle there. Then 1, draw anything, write anything, take as much time as you like. I drew my water bottle and wrote a note to Adira. Then 2, how do you feel in only a few words? Use as little as possible. And then, finally, you can see me taking a picture there because going back to the letter steps. Step Z says, submit your result of survey A2, see below, by email to adira.slattery@gmail.com and use the subject line feedback-survey A2. And here you can see me doing that. And that's the game. You know, I never thought a chair drawing challenge would be so enlightening, but it was, and I've learned something about emotions in games. I wrote the first draft of this section of the script before I actually played feedback, which was complete hubris. I decided it was about futility, monotony, and perfectionism. I likened the purposeless use of every letter of the alphabet on the instructions to the kind of busy work I was assigned in grade school. This was an explication, an analysis of the rules, which is totally different than playing it. I opened a dialogue between an imaginary Adira author and an imaginary myself playing the game to try to figure out from the outside what Adira was trying to communicate through the game to a hypothetical player. Which means that yes, this video was in parts an Innuendo Studios collab without permission because of their beginner's guide video, which went over the model of communication. So, there you go. To go a little meta, that's actually how most of my reviews work, including the other ones in this video. It kind of helps me stay on topic and not talk about like the time I played the game and focus on the game itself. And it also helps me avoid the playtesting problem. As I've heard, when you're playtesting a game, you kind of have to turn off the part of your brain that fills in the gaps that the game doesn't help you with, because otherwise you're like stress testing your GMing skills as opposed to playtesting the game. I've heard that's how playtesting works anyway. There's that tabletop meme about how no plan survives contact with the players. And I think that me analyzing a game as a kind of unplayed platonic ideal is me recognizing that no rules survive contact with the table. So, when I actually sat down to play feedback, my experience was radically situated. I was playing a game on camera for a video, struggling with creative pursuits under the pressure of an ever-encroaching time constraint, and that absolutely came out in the way I played the game. In the moments of introspection between drawing chairs, I was thinking about this YouTube channel. I was thinking about my compulsion to make each chair different, even though that made it less predictable how much time it would take and made the quality vary wildly, which you could argue maps pretty cleanly onto this YouTube channel. You know what I wasn't doing while playing the game? I wasn't thinking about Adira. In my interview with her, I think I was overly concerned with what it means to play a game correctly, which I think in the context of feedback means wanting to feel the right emotion while playing it. But after my experience with the game, I don't think there is a right emotion. I played the game right both times, even though my interpretations and emotions and experience varied wildly between the two. So, with all of that information about emotions in games in our heads, I think it's time to return to our thesis question for maybe the last time and ask, can a game system make you feel dread? Dread is a game of horror and hope, wherein 2 to 6 players use a tumbling block tower to physically and metaphorically represent the rising and falling tensions of a scary story. One player is the host, preparing and directing the story, while the others act as individuals, characters, caught within this tale of dread. Despite being published in 2005, Dread comes highly recommended as a horror game. It won an Emmy for Innovation in 2006, and notably moved Jenga into the realm of tabletop design, leading to further innovations over the years. The game is generally well liked from everything I've heard. Despite the simple core premise though, the rulebook for Dread is 99 pages long. So, in this review, this is a review of Dread, obviously. It's in the title. In this review, we're gonna go mostly chapter by chapter to try to figure out what secrets are hidden in all of those pages. This game is determined to give mountains of direction to its prospective players. Everything from how to avoid metagaming to whether or not the game must be played at the host's house. Spoilers, it doesn't. Host is just what they call the game master. Where does this game's endless mountains of advice end? Well, it won't tell you who should buy refreshments. That, it specifies, is up to your group. The first chapter is the game's introduction. Look out, this is a horror game. You'll use it to tell a story, 2 to 6 players, set the mood with ambiance. Here's a glossary of terms and a link to the website. Already we get a look at the layout choices that were made, and additional material for the game as it becomes available. We also have an email list. It's an old game. It's a valid complaint. It's also a recurring complaint. Information runs between columns, pages, and spreads. There's confusing shenanigans with the sidebars. Okay, real quick, this game loves its sidebars. It uses up real estate on page 4 to tell you there's 2 types of sidebar, marrow and flesh, one to summarize details and one for supplemental tools and information. There are so many sidebars. Like, look at this spread, which is like 90% sidebar, or this spread, which ends by asking a question, then drops an entire column of sidebar, so you have to turn the page and see even more sidebar before suddenly they're answering the question from before? It's wild. But let's get back to the book. Chapter 2, briefly, the rules, explains there's a host and the players. Players play characters. Characters are defined by their questionnaire. Ooh, Dread's second innovation? Maybe, but that's for Chapter 3. Chapter 2 is all about the tower. Long story short, pull a brick to succeed at an action. Ooh. A lot of this advice looks pretty familiar, very analogous to rolling dice. It tells you when to pull a brick, to pull multiple bricks for difficult tasks, how to handle contested actions, and something that I couldn't really find a parallel to, which is called elective pulls. So, because this game doesn't use dice, I kind of had to recalibrate my brain and figure out what it means when you pull a brick. I figured out brick pulls are simultaneously skill checks, saving throws, and a way to define character ability. Like, I'm a scientist, do I know enough Latin to read this? Like, I don't know, let's find out, pull a brick. It's the host's job to figure out how difficult things are, so in all of these situations, it's up to them to say whether a pull is required, or how many bricks to pull. This makes elective pulls a bit of an outlier because it's the player deciding that they need to pull a brick, not the host. And it also confused me on my first read through because it could be for something pretty inconsequential, which I didn't think there was much room in Dread for inconsequential pulls. But luckily, Dread has a sidebar that tells us common times that elective pulls might happen. So let's see. Number 1, to be extra aware in a Oh, it's a perception check rule. It's a, I feel like there's a clue here, but I don't know how to find it rule. It's a, this is something my character would know, but not me, and you're not just giving me the information for some reason rule. That makes sense. It's bad, but it makes sense. It's probably clear by now, but among a lot of the familiar looking advice, a lot of the rules in this chapter are customized for using the tower. Specifically, there's a sidebar, which tells us how to conduct ourselves while we're interacting with the tower. Only use one hand, but you can switch hands but you can't pull blocks from the top 2 layers. You put used blocks on top, alternate it between layers, and after you set the brick down, wait a moment to see if the tower falls. You know, Jenga. Is this overly specific and over-explained? Yeah, a lot of the book is. Dread is a painfully overwritten game. I'm sorry if that sounds offhand and rude, but like, it's pretty bad, and I can't go paragraph by paragraph to show you how overwritten it is, because that would make my script overwritten, and I don't want to do that. So, in practice though, this is the most forgivably overwritten section. That's a bad idea. In practice though, this is one of the most forgivably overwritten sections. When tension is high, you want there to be full clarity around how to interact with the tower. You don't want people to be flipping through a rule book while death is on the line. Death? Yes. To say it clearly and plainly, when you make the tower fall, your character dies. Right? Isn't that the core pitch of Dread? That's how I first heard it, but in reality it means that your character leaves the story. If death doesn't quite make sense for your character in that moment, then, well, the book gives a couple good alternatives and a lot of crappy ones. Like, oh no, the tower fell. I guess I have to go now to visit my relatives. Most of the actual plays I've seen, though, just have you die if you knock the tower down. And based on the How to Host Dread chapter, the book knows that death is the #1 best option that should be used almost every time. It just gave 26 alternatives because, there is also some good advice in here that's been enshrined in the play culture. My favorite is that it says you should not jump scare your players while they're pulling a brick, but that you can monologue about the danger they're in while they're deciding whether or not they should pull the brick, abandon the pull, or knock the tower down voluntarily.
I'm gonna end this fucking simulation right now! Shit's going everywhere, and the freaking black hole's being created, and the sparks are flying.
Boom. As you're pulling on this thing over and over again, you begin to scream as you see as Cat 5 cables are snapping.
Be careful, you're gonna get electrocuted.
Eventually, when you feel your body hit the cage, and as metal connects onto metal, you feel as thousands of volts just jolt through your body. And finally, at some point, his body just collapses onto the ground. And steam starts to rise from his burnt corpse. Hey, thanks for playing.
I'm a goddamn hero.
He was a goddamn idiot.
This is such a great rule. It really is. Like, you succeed in an action and leave the narrative in a dramatically appropriate way, leaving the characters and the other players better off because of your sacrifice. No comment. It's a good rule. And also, it seems like it'd be pretty easy to port over to other systems, but you do lose the tower reset, if that matters to you.
Is it really that important to know the rules to a game before you play it? I once ran Dread for my friends with only "you use a Jenga tower" as a frame of reference. I still don't know what a questionnaire is.
Chapter 3 explains the questionnaire, Dread's second innovation. It is, in a word, your character sheet, a fact obfuscated by the lack of a formalized character sheet, which, good, the best character sheet has always been and will always be a piece of notebook paper. The host is instructed to prepare a list of questions which describe what each character is capable of physically, mentally, and emotionally. They're your stats, but instead of numbers, we have characterizing narrative parameters. If you're unfamiliar, you might say like, oh, does that mean like there's a question for each stat? No, there can be any number of questions, and there's little to no crossover required between questionnaires. This does mean, though, since each character needs their own questionnaire, that it's up to the host to come up with a lot of questions. Luckily, Dread lists example questions at the bottom of every single page. Except this one. And half of this one. But to make up for it, there are 13 and a half listed on the last page. 13 and a half? Yes, because the questions run between pages and spreads. Does that ever lead to weird misreads? Yes. Like how about, something consistently beat your siblings. Oh dear. Let's flip the page to see how that question starts. Oh, At what game did you consistently beat your siblings? Oh. That's one of 189 examples though, so pretty cherry-picked. The questions themselves though range from fluff, like what was the last bumper sticker you bought, to character defining. How did you discover you were a werewolf? My favorite guideline in this process is what the game calls intrusive questions. Things like, why are you married if you aren't in love? Or, who else knows you're a fraud? It's easy to imagine these questions with more or less intensity, but the questions and the idea itself work well as a way to get players hooked on their character, especially seeing as they don't get to make the character, in a traditional sense. Everything else is about what you'd expect, but there's one more piece of the questionnaire system that stuck in my brain. Leveling up. Like, if you think about it, the questions and answers are like your skills and your stats, so getting more questions to answer is like leveling up. Dredd says, if your character survives, you can bring them back to continue the story. Just take notes and answer, what did I learn, what long-term harm did I sustain, and what have I been up to? This is a boring guideline, but it's so close. Like, you know the classic Halloween movie and the most recent Halloween reboot?
I've waited for him.
That's what it should look like to level up in Dredd. And while I can imagine Laurie Strode going from a clever but terrorized babysitter into a traumatized, hardened, revenge-obsessed mother by answering those 3 boring-ish questions, it'd require intrusive answers on the part of the player. But I think that's cool that a clever enough playgroup could play like a 70s slasher and then a gritty 2010s 20s reboot, or Stephen King's It, or something else. But still, it's the one place in this chapter where Dredd kind of pulls its punch, because in all other regards, questionnaires are kind of handholdy. Like, read as written, Dredd is a game of pre-generated characters who have designated places in a predetermined story. It says, the host should create the questionnaires beforehand in order to tailor the characters to the story they have planned. This isn't to say you're just reading from a script or that there's nothing to be discovered through play. After all, Dredd itself says that the host writes the questions, but the player is the one who answers them. But there's no doubt that the book is giving a kind of authorship responsibility to the host. The host says, this is who you are, and kind of this is your place in the story, and then asks the player, why is this who you are? It's about time I pull a brick. Despite these unfortunate implications on how Dredd seems to think a story in a tabletop game should be constructed, questionnaires end up in a very interesting place. They're instructional in a way. They're trying to show that you get interesting characters by giving them flaws, by asking intrusive questions. In my opinion, a lot of rules in a lot of rulebooks are like this. They're meant to be used until, as Dredd itself says, your group finds its particular style and rhythm and finds the rulebook useless. I love that. Questionnaires also are as close to a diegetic character sheet as you can get. It's impossible to create your character or answer questions without considering the narrative implications because there's nothing else to consider. It's all narrative. There are 16 more example questionnaires, but they're customized for the 3 adventures in the back of the book. We'll get to those right after we skim the chapters on hosting the game and crafting different kinds of stories. Chapter 4, How to Host a Dredd Game, is about what you'd expect. Lots of good basic advice. Lots of good basic advice. My favorite tip is that it tells you not to pull your punches even or especially when the tower seems about to fall. It follows this up with some advice on deciding how many bricks need to be pulled, and god damn, it's... Okay, listen, I don't care if it blows my script anymore. Look at this. So it finishes up some good advice with some more good advice. Ask yourself what a character could accomplish with 1 pull or with no pulls. Every action is contextual though and can be affected by a variety of factors. Okay. For example, accuracy, advantage, circumstance, complexity, condition, consequence, distraction, duration, encumbrance, epiphany, injury, passion, quality, resource, style, subtlety, or time. Let's explain each of those with its own paragraph and include nearly one column sidebar explaining how, really, they all fit into the larger categories of condition, consequence, and advantage. That was a spread and a half. Fuck off. Ooh, but it's beginner friendly. No, it's not. Stop living a lie. 1,400 words of nonsense isn't beginner friendly. It's scared shitless players might fail. You know what's beginner friendly? After years of reading OSR products, I read Best Left Buried, which said, difficulty is contextual, and players need to stack the odds to succeed. Each piece of leverage moves difficulty from impossible to disadvantage to a normal roll to advantage to no roll required. Boom. Years of reading OSR products, my brain went click, and I no longer even needed the rule. Back to Dread though, there's more sentences split between spreads because of extraneous sidebars, overly granular advice on how to prep and run a game, and 6 more chapters, each on how to run a different genre of horror. In my recollection, they were all generically, helpful, but upon rereading them, they're just packed with the most obvious boring advice. Sometimes good, sometimes and sometimes flat out repeated from previous chapters. My least favorite bit of advice is in the Supernatural chapter, where it says how to handle a dangerous situation with someone seeing a supernatural horror for the first time in their life. Pull a brick not to faint. Pull a brick not to run off screaming. Pull a brick to resist being entranced by the vampire's stare alone. Pull another for its voice, and then pull once more to escape her taloned claws. Like, I don't have time to get into this. My favorite detail is in the gore chapter, where it says you should probably ask your friends how much gore they're comfortable with. Finally, there's an appendix for alternatives to the tower. For some reason, it still lists things based on manual dexterity, which kind of undermines the argument that this is an accessibility concern. I swear I heard that somewhere. If you're scrolling through the PDF, you might think, oh yeah, here's some rules for using dice instead of the tower. But if you read it, then it says you have to stack the dice after you roll them. So anyway, that's the whole book besides the adventures. So now we're going to talk about the adventures. They suck. But Vi, you've only read one of the 3 adventures. Fine, I'll read the other 2 right now, I said while writing the script, and then I tried, and I couldn't do it. Because they're not adventures, they're short story outlines. I skimmed the other 2 adventures, but we're just going to look at the first one, the beginner-friendly one, because it's the worst, for a lot of reasons, and that's not being flippant or unfair, it's literally the one it tells you to run. So let's jump in to the 12-page adventure, Beneath the Full Moon.
You all attend the same school. You don't know each other before this particular excursion, right? But you have all decided to go survival camping in the Grand Canyon.
2 to 6 friends or acquaintances join up for a spring break Grand Canyon trip. It was all going well until last night when something mauled their guide and stole their food. Gameplay will start moments after the characters have found the guide's badly mauled body, so any information up to that point is germane. You know, for a game about ramping tension, this is a very odd choice that it makes 3 times in a row. Unlike the other 2 adventures, it tells you what themes your story will have. Survival without camping skills or tools, caring for the mauled guide, and fear of the pursuing beast. It also doesn't delineate a 3-act structure like the latter 2 adventures do. It breaks the story up into 17 possible scenes instead. And then it tells you how you could slot the 17 scenes into a 3-act structure. Each scene gets a description and a whole paragraph of possible polls. In this one adventure, there are 137 suggestions for when to pull a brick. For this fucking one adventure. For every scene, except for this one. Because that one only exists to tell you that actually that scene won't happen. Here's a good thing about it. The suggested poll paragraphs are basically scene outlines, or maybe like a record of polls that happened during playtesting. But they're stream of consciousness enough that sometimes, whether deliberately or accidentally, they tell jokes. So like in the scene Sleeping on the River, which plays into the themes of survival and the beast, the suggested polls for the scene include finding an outcropping of rocks that is rough enough but not in rapids, tying off properly, staying alert through the night, sleeping in an awkward position, overcoming the embarrassment of going to the bathroom over the side of the raft, not falling in when going to the bathroom over the side of the raft. Like, yeah, that made me laugh. And then it made me grimace, because this game is obsessed with polls. Like, to ensure one character dies, call for a poll at least once every 5 minutes, or 2 to 3 polls every 5 minutes for more deadly games. It says, if the characters collectively decide to leave the mauled guide behind, have each player pull 2 bricks, which isn't really a choice at all, because they have to bring the guide, or else they'll fuck up the adventure's intended brick pulls per minute. It says, kind of. I'm like 10% exaggerating. Alright, that's enough overview for one video. I ended up in a bad mood, and that's basically the whole book anyway. I'm ready to move on with my life. But before we sum it all up, it's finally time to answer why. Why Dread? It's been with us since that first music track kicked in, since the title of the video even, like I said. Well, it's because this is my 3rd annual Twitter drama video. Can I get a flame war in chat, please? Post flame war in chat. This past July, I made a post on twitter.com, first mistake, I know, using very few words to gesture at some very large ideas. In response, nearly 20 people showed up independently to tell me that Dread exists, a game that is purportedly intrinsically good at horror. So you know what I did? I opened up the Dread PDF that's been on my hard drive for years because of course I'd heard of fucking Dread. And I read the game several times over. Now, having shared it with you, it's time to tie this hour-long mod podge of ideas together. But first things first.
First things first, gotta find Aunt May.
This is my damn video, which I worked on for 5 months. Those tomatoes died right as they were fruiting. To minimize internet nonsense, I'm setting some ground rules. First, support indie tabletop creators. Why do you think this channel exists? Second, I'm avoiding talking about this dusty old web forum called The Forge, or mostly trying to avoid talking about it. But if you want the historical context for the ideas I'm challenging, stream Trying to Be Kind on your favorite podcasting app, especially episodes 6, 7, and 8. Third, and finally, it's not evil to make money in tabletop games. No one's saying that, but I do have to clarify it because I am going to talk about the ways people have acted in the pursuit of financial success, and the internet is a weird place. I think that's everything. So now, Dread. As we learned from Adira, a game is more than the text of the book itself. Games contain multitudes. Dread is Jenga, and if the tower falls, you die. It's several years of actual play live streams and a surprising amount of Geek and Sundry coverage. Dread is also 99 pages of kinda crappy layout and overwritten essays on how to play a horror game. None of those things are independently scary, except maybe the overwritten book. And yes, that includes the tower. Listen, as a kid, I rode this roller coaster with the intention to act as bored as possible. It was dreadful. I did not have fun. That ride has never been the same since. So if one more person tries to come up and tell me that a Jenga tower is inherently scary, I'm gonna shit. The tower isn't scary, but it is memorable and really catchy. So catchy, in fact, that I'm pretty sure it's eclipsed all of the book's problems. In my estimation, it exists to correlate the heightened emotions of playing Jenga with the heightened emotions of good storytelling. It says, oh, you know that apprehension you feel about approaching the tower because it looks like it's about to fall over? That's what the story's doing right now too. That's the story. Which is, I'm not going to say only effective, but maybe especially effective if the story is in fact good. So it's not impossible to be scared while playing Dread, just like it's not impossible to have fun on this roller coaster, or so I keep telling myself. But the rules aren't inherently scary as much as they are a guideline for how scary you should make the story at any given moment. The tower is such a point of focus because, if you haven't noticed, I've spent the past hour or so grappling with the tabletop scene's fixation on rules. For some reason, it's very important that the rules specifically are credited with gameplay outcomes. I was fascinated with Taylor's tweet about playing Dread without reading the rules because The only reason it'd be controversial is if you can't just follow some version of the rules. You have to follow some unspoken number of the real rules enough that you're actually playing the game. It's particularly forgy to caution against changing any rules because that takes your group from agreeing on a fixed rule set to agreeing on some nebulous, hopeful outcome, and the whole table might not agree on what exactly that looks like. My problem with that is that it's built on the unstated assumptions that 1, a book is the clearest way to establish a social contract, 2, the whole table wants exactly what the book is promising, and 3, that the rules specifically do deliver that experience. On the one hand, this is a perfect fit for Dread, because if you remember, I connected how many rules is playing the game to it's not the game if you don't touch the dice, because they're kind of the same idea. And in Dread, it's impossible not to touch the dice. On the other hand, it's complete nonsense to apply to Dread, a game which explicitly says that its rules are scaffolding to help you while you're developing your skills. Although I guess an alternative read of that would be that at some point you know the rules well enough that you'll never really break them. Which I hope is not the intention. This rules nonsense is also why I contrasted Honey Heist and Tunnel Goons. Honey Heist thrives on the fact that it encoded its catchy premise of you're a heist bear in a bowler hat directly into its rules, while Tunnel Goons' success has almost nothing to do with its rules. In fact, it thrives on being mostly empty. Partly because of that, it has over 100 hacks and expansions. Check out this spreadsheet, link in the description. People have used the skeleton of Tunnel Goons to play Tunnel Mycologists and Canal Goons, Super Goons and Spy Goons, Space Goblins and Dish Pit Witches. Someone on TikTok told a story about how they took the next step and their group used Dish Pit Witches to tell a hidden magical world story about food service workers who ended up extorting the dragon mafia or something, which sounds awesome. But Dish Pit Witches isn't a game about blackmailing dragons, and its rules don't help you use a hidden magical world as a metaphor for queerness. Even though that is a pretty cool metaphor. In fact, the witches part of Dish Pit Witches, I reread it. It's right here, I think. Yeah, it doesn't actually have any magic in it at all. It's like, I think it's textually like magic in the queer sense, like I talked about in my Anniversary of Stonewall video a year and a half ago. What's cool is the players found that story themselves without any help from the rules. And this is important, if there was a game that did that, they obviously don't need it because they're skilled enough to have done it themselves. And that's a success in my book. So why is it so important that the system supports your fun? Why don't we celebrate players succeeding without the help of a rulebook? Because that's not the whole picture, is it? It's never the whole picture until we talk yet again about the elephant, nay, the dragon, in the room. I think it's about time we take a look at that tweet I made. D&D is bad at horror? Rookie mistake. No game system is good at horror. Now, adventures, on the other hand...
Let's start at the very beginning.
The phrase D&D is bad at horror echoes all of the people who try to persuade 5e fans to play indie games. If you insist that systems tell stories, and then tell the person that the system they're playing doesn't tell the story they want, it opens up room to recommend an indie game. The only problem is it's not true, and some 5e fans know that because they've likely felt all kinds of emotions and told all kinds of stories in D&D. So it ends up sounding like you're asking them to trade in a game that does everything for a game that does one thing. But D&D can't do everything, you might say, and while I'm tempted to agree, that's still approaching the question from the wrong angle. It's more that it's a hard sell that 5e is even worth modifying, and there's like thousands of other reasons it's bad, and... Oh shit, sorry, I need to take this. Hello?
Vi, I need to complain.
Radiger? Is this Officer Radiger from the SCP
Why are you calling me my full name like you're my mom?
Alright, Rad, what's this about?
I'm here to complain.
What's up?
Did you know that people won't stop talking about playing SCP-5e campaigns?
Oh, I mean, I kind of assumed that was happening. It happens with most things.
Did you know that I would like them to stop?
Yes, that I did know. This usually doesn't work, but have you mentioned a good alternative?
Yes, I'm telling them that they should play Mothership instead.
That is actually a pretty good idea.
Yes, I know it is, because I am a fucking genius.
Uh-huh.
And also, Teamster, Scientist, and Marine are sort of already built into the main archetypes of SCP characters, and there can be robots. Anderson robotics is a thing. There can be robots. Listen, what I'm saying is it would work.
No, I believe you. And you know what? I hope they listen to you too. But hey, real quick, this call is conveniently on topic. Why do you think 5e isn't a good fit?
Because 5e is not made for science fiction. It's made for high fantasy. It's a system that is built for a very specific purpose, and if you're trying to run an SCP thing with it, you're going to bring so much stuff to the table that you don't need, that's going to take time and effort to sort out.
Yeah, like there's no elves in SCP.
I mean, unless you're playing like Wanderer's Library stuff.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's cool. But I mean, like, people don't fight battles with swords and...
Yeah, there are a couple sword-related articles.
Okay, but like magic isn't... Like resurrection doesn't... Oh my god.
Okay, listen, it's a bad idea, okay? Okay? You got it? Don't be a little smartass.
No, I'm not being a smartass. I get it. I believe you. Like, as much as I don't believe that systems tell stories, one story they definitely do tell is the history of their creation and development. And that means that 5e is the record of 100,000 fantasy campaigns that have gone on since the 70s. And you have to reckon with all that if you're repurposing it.
Yeah, like the amount of work that you would have to do to skin out all of the elements of 5e that are specifically about the Forgotten Realms, like characters' names at the beginning of spells and stuff. It would be a lot of effort that you could instead not have to do.
Yeah, don't I know it. Hey, do you remember in our 5e Gaslight London horror campaign when you said your character had been hanging out in the ethereal plane between campaigns despite there being no precedent for its existence?
Hey, do you remember never telling me that I couldn't do that?
I remember it being my first campaign ever. Did you know you could have realized it was a bad idea?
Did you know that I'm in your walls? I'm in your walls, Vi. Vi, I'm in your walls. Did you know? Did you know?
Rookie mistake, that's just me provoking Twitter. No game system is good at horror. Now, that's a rude one. Obviously, I know there are horror games. I literally reviewed a sci-fi horror game this year in the best video I've ever made. In fact, in the spirit of fairness, Dread's tower and Mothership's stress mechanic are both thermometers. They're huge bookmarks that say, remember, you're supposed to be this scared right now, while both being about as independently subtle and scary as the Chiller font. The only difference is I can hand out one stress in an entire game of Mothership, and Mothership's adventures are amazing. So, where was I? Oh yeah. I'm not saying that horror systems don't exist, or that horror is impossible at the table. In fact, what I am saying is the same exact thing twice. Saying no game system is good at horror, and refuting D&D is bad at horror, are the same idea. They're both saying system is not the primary determining factor of a gaming experience. It's the players and their investment in the game that is far more important than any other factor, which is controversial. To try to hammer it home, there's a reason the question is never, can a skilled enough group tell a scary story? Because of course they can. So the framing has to change. The question becomes, can we design a system that makes you feel dread? Or, more cynically, it becomes the statement, our specific rules make you feel specific emotions. So when I butt heads in this way with the idea that your rule set decides your experience, I appear to be validating all the people that use 5e to do everything and decreasing indie gaming's market share because most tabletop consumers are only focused on one rule set, Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. But I'm not fighting that battle. I'm fighting a parallel battle that runs even deeper. To quote ChiquitaFajita.blogspot.com, Wizards of the Coast was who embraced Dungeons & Dragons as a game that could be played in any way by anyone, as a brand with which consumers could identify more than a product per se. The open gaming license managed to reassert the importance of unique table experiences by establishing Wizards of the Coast as a monopoly. Yes, one of the deepest cuts of all hidden at the end of the video. For their consumers, Hasbro Incorporated has co-opted the ritual of play to associate the act of communal storytelling itself with the D&D brand. When you're telling stories with your friends, even if it's in your own world, even if it's with homebrew rules, even if you don't touch the dice, that's hashtag D&D, baby. The blog post continues. To combat this, indie enthusiasts often criticize Wizards of the Coast or their consumers for not realizing that system matters. I asked earlier, in games with more than one rule, what constitutes interacting with the whole game? And the answer is, it doesn't matter. There is no answer. It's a question as misguided as our thesis or our hypothesis. I don't know the difference. I don't know if I'm using that word correctly. Do not correct me in the comment section. Do not. This is not only because a game is a holistic experience that's impossible to play perfectly or wholly, but because in the end, the emotions you felt and the fun you had probably had far less to do with the rules than you might think. And that goes for you D&D folks too. Wizards of the Coast has a vested interest in making you think that systems aren't easy to learn and your skills aren't transferable, but they really, really are on both accounts. Telling meaningful or impactful stories together with people you trust is a skill, and no book can do it for you or let you skip the learning process or prevent failure. And that's okay. It's okay to fail. It's okay to be a beginner. Being a beginner in tabletop games is awesome. So you know what? Get out there and go buy an indie game and play your own version of it and fail and succeed and improve and laugh and be scared, because in the end, it's all up to you. The responsibility to improve and work at it, as well as the rewards of your success. Don't let a corporation or even a product take that away from you. So for all of you that have stuck around to the end of the video, thank you. And here is one group's story of that happening.
Session 1.
Okay, so your name is Slap Happy Jack?
Slappy for short.
And you're a furbolg barbarian who was...
Raised by clowns, yes.
Okay, sure. Slappy, you're up. What do you do?
I pie the troll.
Okay, just so we're clear, you mean an actual pie?
Pete said I could use improvised weapons.
And you just have one of those?
12, actually. Banana creams. They're on my sheet.
Session 40.
The whole temple's coming down! You have to get the Phyllectry out of here now!
No, Slappy! Not without you!
Go, damn you!
Slappy,
I know, Pacifica. I've always known.
Thank you for watching. That's the whole video, I think. Thank you and thank you and thank you. It does feel like I'm forgetting something though. I never did get around to claiming that this school of thought is the impetus for like licensed IP RPGs. That probably could have started some flame wars. I also didn't mention that one of my friends made several 4th edition characters years ago for freeform roleplay. That was funny. I forgot to make the comparison. No game is good at humor. That's probably could have helped some people understand. No, that wasn't it either though. Fuck, what was it? Oh, fuck, adventures!